Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shannon Coleman Siciliano, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, which is Welcomed, Embracing Students and Families Through Summer and into Fall. So today's session is it's part of a 4-part series of webinars that we're doing um, in partnership with Maryland State Department of Education of Early Childhood with a grant to the Center for Early Childhood Education and Intervention at the University of Maryland, and with us with a partner with Attendance Works. And so the purpose of the research study that is happening is so that we can better understand and improve attendance and participation in the early years. And so when we take into account the extraordinary lift and circumstances that this past school year has provided, we really think that collecting this information from the study is going to be helpful, not just now, but also in the future. And so we hope that you have been able to attend all of the webinars or have at least watched the recordings. And we'll also have one more, our last and final webinar will be held in the fall of the 2021-22 school year. And so the team today is, again, it's Attendance Works, and we work to advance student success in closing equity gaps by ensuring that attendance policies align with best practices, by promoting evidence and research-based strategies and promoting effective attendance and absenteeism communication. And we're pleased to be able to partner with CECEI as they study attendance patterns and early education programs throughout the state and evaluate the effectiveness of the resources that we're able to provide with you from Attendance Works. And so now it is your turn. We want to know more about you and who's here. And so we're interested in learning who's joined us today. So if you can type your name, your organization's name, and your role in the chat, that would be great.
Hi, this is Jane Sundius, and I work with Attendance Works as a senior fellow, and I'll be managing the chat today, making sure that our presenters have a chance to understand what you're asking when their question's up. And it looks like we have a lot of Judy Center folks as well. Oh yeah, really a lot. That's wonderful. I really love what the Judy Centers have been doing during the pandemic. Public schools, Washington County, great. St. Mary's. This is really a very nice mix of folks.
Great. Okay, thank you everyone for typing in the chat. And if you haven't done so, please continue to do so as we move on in our agenda today. Okay, so for our learning objectives, just want to acknowledge that, this past year has been has been literally unlike any other that we've ever experienced. And we know that thousands of early learners were not able to be part of an organized learning community. And that's especially true for those who live in communities that were hit hardest with COVID-19. And so today what we're here to do is to discuss how early education program providers at schools and communities can make the best use of their attendance and enrollment data to help address some of the education inequities in the recovery planning. Along with that, in recovery planning, we're really thinking about returning students and families to our more organized learning communities. And in order to do that, we know that strong, trusting relationships need to be created that create a feeling of belonging for families. And ways to do that is by, again, building those relationships, but then also utilizing the data to help decide who we need to target in the returning efforts, and to see if our if what we've been implementing is actually working. And so today, what we are going to be focusing on is really those key elements for transformational family engagement, and coming up with ideas for actualizing them. And then we're going to get into how you can use the attendance and enrollment data to support and measure your effectiveness in your family engagement strategies over the summer and the beginning of the fall. Next slide. Okay, so our agenda today, we have a robust agenda, and we're really honored to have a number of experts be able to join us today. And so we will be joined by Eyal Bergman, who is a doctoral candidate from Harvard's Graduate School of Education, and he's going to talk about really transforming family engagement to it, the way to do that requires adult learning or really unlearning. And then you'll have time to talk and reflect on what you've heard from his presentation with a group and share out. And then we'll get into a panel discussion around how we can be more equity focused and solidarity driven with our family engagement, again, for the summer and moving into the fall. And we'll be joined by Kathleen Kearns, Stacy Henson, Bobby McDonnell, and Eyal Bergman will also join us again. And then Sue is going to move us into using attendance and enrollment data to inform your engagement and your outreach strategy. And then we'll hear from Shannon Burrows Campbell and also Christina Schwan from the Program Compliance Officer for Family and Community Engagement. We'll have a chat reflection, and then we will close out for today. And so why, again, does all of this matter? As we've shared with you before, the importance, you're working so hard to educate students and ensure that they are actually ready, that they master kindergarten readiness skills and they're ready for their formal K through 12 education. And so what we've found and what research has shown is that students who miss frequently, if it's just 0 to 1 day, I'm sorry, students who attend regularly, so if they miss less than a day a month, then they are actually able to master the readiness skills, so the math, the letter recognition, pre-literacy skills, and their social and emotional development. And so we want to make sure that students in our early grades are showing up regularly so they are ready for kindergarten. And really why this matters now is because we know that, again, we've had an unprecedented challenges and also some potential opportunities in the past year. And how this is going to impact your programs and your students and families is that, again, researchers are seeing that the early grade classrooms are likely to experience higher than normal levels of churn. And so the reasons for that is because there's going to be enrollment, possibility for enrollment hesitancy with our families. And some of that could be just, nervousness about the physical safety and health safety of their students and returning to school. Also, families are going to be, their schools are more likely to experience more chronic absence in the early grades than ever before. When we think about, students, some students by the time the school year starts will have been out of formal environments of education for almost 18 months. And so what that's going to do is families and students will then need to get ready for new environments, establish like new routines and regular routines of showing up to school. We are also going to need to put in, transportation support and backups for students in classes so that we can address the challenges for students and families that they face. And so this is going to be potentially an even more challenging year than normal years when we think about not only enrolling students, but keeping them coming on a regular basis. So what we will need to do in order to ensure that students and families are supported is that we need to make sure that we are focusing on equity, and that we have what we're calling a solidarity driven family engagement practice for families and for students. We need to actually have a compelling case for enhanced attention to our school climate. And so it's going to be even more important for us to monitor attendance and chronic absenteeism, to determine which students would need more support, and to be able to secure immediate feedback about whether what we've been implementing and what you've been putting in place is having an impact for students and families. We also need to make sure that we're establishing authentic partnerships between teachers, parents, and caregivers, in doing so as well. And so that's what we're going to be learning about today, is how to actually do that and what actions you can take, to ensure that the supports are in place, to create that partnership, and that you have the data to be able to pivot if necessary. Okay, and so now it is my pleasure to introduce Eyal Bergman, and he is going to be sharing some of the research that he's been working on. And so Eyal, he is an immigrant, a Latino immigrant who was raised in bilingual homes, so Spanish and English, and he's always been driven to cross-cultural spaces. His interest in these sorts of spaces that led him to roles in community-based work, and school district leadership. And now his current passion and expertise is in building trust between educators and the communities that they serve. He was the founder and leader of the Family Community and Community Engagement Office in the Cajon Valley School District in El Cajon, California. And he's just finished his time as the superintendent resident in Chelsea Public Schools in Massachusetts. And that was as part of his final year in the residency and the Doctoral of Education Leadership program at Harvard Graduate School of Education. He's co-author of version 2 of the dual capacity building framework for family school partnerships with Dr. Karen Mapp, that should be released pretty soon. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Eyal, and he will share his expertise on transforming family engagement, which is going to require adult learning and unlearning, and how we can work towards a liberatory, equity-focused, solidarity-driven family engagement practice. And Eyal?
Well, thank you, Shannon. It's really great to be with you. I actually had my start to my career in Maryland, so it sort of feels like coming home. I did a lot of work at a community-based organization and that worked primarily in Montgomery County, but also in Prince George's County. And it was really through that experience and working with the growing Latino population that I built a passion and for trying to do my best to connect the community to the schools. And that experience in Maryland has sent me on my path. And so it's really a pleasure to be back in Maryland, even if it's virtually. So as Shannon shared, I've just defended my dissertation at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in the Doctor of Education Leadership program. And during my time, I've really had the privilege of working closely and collaborating with Dr. Karen Mapp on the dual capacity building framework, and also on a paper that we're coming close to releasing very soon. We're just putting the final touches on it, that really looks at the experience that we have all gone through and really takes some lessons learned from this era of dual pandemics, the COVID-19 crisis, as well as the renewed national reckoning on racial injustice. And what we call for, so I'll share a little bit about what we are calling for in the paper and a little bit about what we think could be a useful path forward as a way to start this dialogue here today. So the North Star, if you will, sort of a place to be pointing our arrows that we think is really important coming out of this era, is something we're calling a liberatory, equity-focused, and solidarity-driven family and community engagement practice. And what that means to us is it's liberatory because it names and identifies and seeks to interject on oppressive systems, or systems that have been built on or designed with oppressive pedagogy, or really just that have been subject to our country's history of racism, where there's no way really to escape it. And so all of us operate in systems like that. And so naming them and identifying ways to operate and to redesign the systems, that's why we call for a liberatory practice. It's equity focused because it's laser focused on identifying ways to deliver more equitable instruction in the classroom as schools are orienting, schools and early education centers are orienting around equitable outcomes. And it's driven through an engine of solidarity because it sees that the way forward to get to equity focused and liberatory practice is to identify the relationship with families not as an us and them, but as we walk together and we partner together for children's success. So, systems aren't usually designed in this way, and there's a lot of things that have to happen in order for systems to really embody that. And so, we're saying that there is a North Star, but one really important element that we feel is really important to drive the learning that it takes to get to that type of system is not just to think about the learning, but also some unlearning. And I'm personally, I've been thinking a lot about learning myself. I just became a new father a little bit less than a year ago. So I see my baby girl, she's almost 10 months old, and I am learning a lot about learning just by watching her interact with the world. And what I'm seeing is that she has a schema built for some things and she's still building a schema for other things. So when her mom walks in the room, she has a very clear schema. That's my mama. And she wants to be with her mama. But then there's other things that she doesn't have a schema for. So, something will pass by, a balloon will pass by in the sky, and she'll be very fixated on it. And she'll be really curious about what it is. She's still building schemas for a lot of things in the world. And I think about that when I see her, I think about the relationships between parents and educators, because there really isn't an exchange between families and educators that isn't built on an existing schema already. So we all walk into those relationships with notions about what a good family engagement experience can look like, should look like, is supposed to look like, will look like in the future. And so it's not just a matter of layering new learning on top of educators so that they can do this work, but also examining assumptions and biases and ways of operating that can stimulate some unlearning so that we can discard old notions and move towards this new liberatory practice. I have a slide, if it could be displayed now, because I also have an analogy that I think is helpful for how we can actually get into that, how to stimulate that unlearning, if you will. I think it's probably the next slide. There it is. I take this inspiration from a mural. I just completed my residency in Chelsea, Massachusetts, and there's murals all over the city. I was really inspired by them, and I take this inspiration from this mural here. And so I start, in order to get to this more liberatory experience, I think that there's a multi-step process that is most helpful for generating that unlearning. First is the really critical role of seminal experiences. This is something that Mark Warren writes about in his book, Fire in the Heart, How White Activists Embrace Racial Justice. And what he says is there's really some moments where white educators can hear from people of color in a different way for them that gives them a sort of a before and after moment about what it might be like to experience discrimination. And it doesn't necessarily mean that educators are forever changed in that moment, but it does mean that there is a sort of experience that you go through that you can point to years later as a really transformative moment. And so things like relationally built home visits, where we're really just going in to listen to families, experiences that are intentionally designed to flip the power dynamics, because there are really persistent racialized power dynamics that play out in the homeschool relationship. So seminal experiences where educators really listen to families in a very different way that may be something that is new to them. This is sort of like the seed that can be planted. And everything that grows starts with a seed. The next part of this analogy goes that the nutrients in the soil that surround the seed is the time for colleagues to collaborate with each other to unpack what has happened in those seminal experiences. So if educators are in the community, they're learning from families, and then they can come back together into their cohort groups and really hear from each other about what it is that they thought they were going to see, what actually transpired, maybe some guided support to unearth some of those assumptions and biases that occur to all of us because just by nature of us being human. Then that can really start to allow folks to really start to name those assumptions and biases and name those experiences that they felt were transformative, and then start to seek more of them and rely on each other's networks. And we know that collaborative time with each other is really important for driving learning. And I think it's also important for driving unlearning. The next part of the analogy is every seed, even with the nutrients in the soil, needs water, it needs sunshine, it needs a supportive, authorizing environment that surrounds it. And so it needs leadership that is comfortable expressing what it means to be liberatory, or at least what it means to drive equity, what the impact of systemic racism has been in our country and how that plays out in our work. And so it needs to have leadership and a supportive environment that says this is the direction we should go in. And then finally, you need a farmer. You need somebody to marshal the work. So it's very difficult to simply layer this on top of people's already packed work schedules. And so to the extent that systems can hire people that are dedicated to driving this type of work, the more successful it'll be. And if you really want to get to a whole field and not just have the farmer go bit by bit, you need tools, and you need to build strategies and so forth, so that way it can go from just being one line in the farm to being a wider and more systemic practice. So that's sort of the analogy. And I think the next step is to really invite you to think about what that would look like. But if, depending on where you are in that process, it may be helpful to be thinking about, like, what are those possible seminal experiences that you could cultivate? How can we allocate collaboration time to really unearth those assumptions and biases that come up, or to extend those seminal experiences? So I hope that's helpful. That's a little bit about the work that I've been doing.
If you had trouble using the Jamboard, we understand it's a new technology. We were trying something out, but we will also take ideas in the chat and invite folks to, oh, look, actually there are a couple of ideas. So I will share the Jamboard, and then we will also, if folks want to share in the chat what they discussed or a couple of ideas they heard, please do that as well. But this is a fun feature that's like available through your Gmail. So in the Jamboard, we see that Naisha and Stacy talked about communication with families, about how their children are interacting with their peers, really listening deeply to families' concerns, and partnering with families so that when surveys are created or other activities are happening, that families are part of the design process as well as being part of the surveying itself. Taking tablets and desks to family who need them for their virtual home spaces, so really supporting family access to learning, meaningful two-way communication that helps both educators and families. Are there other ideas that we're seeing in the chat, Jane? Jane, you're muted.
One would think that by a year and a half, I would get this right. But so this was a kind of a conversation about what's difficult. And actually, that's what we talked about in the room I was in, that parents have experiences with schools that weren't positive. And so you really have to change that narrative. And what we also talked about was a Judy Center that had a highly Hispanic population, like 95%, but it was very, very diverse, and the trust was difficult, particularly because some of the residents were documented and others were not. And so there was transience and turnover, and you can imagine very difficult to build trust. So while the idea sounds like what needs to be done, it's not an easy road.
And then the one other idea that came up in the chat that I want to draw attention to before we move to the panel and turn it back over to Shannon is I noticed the idea of a judgment-free zone. And I think that so families feel judged all the time for decisions that they make, for being unable to always fully provide for their children, whether it's the clothing or food or otherwise, and just creating that judgment-free zone so that families know they can come to us with whatever's on their plate, and that we're here to support them and support their children, I think is essential. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Shannon, to bring up our fantastic panel that we have to further reflect on these ideas and practices.
Great, thank you. And just one thing that I want to reflect in conversation that we had with Eyal in prepping for today that really stuck with me is that he shared, if we do not actively try to flip the power dynamic between parents and school, then the default is going to be that the school and teachers will automatically have the power. And so, as you're thinking about re-engaging over the summer and into the fall, it's thinking about how are you actively flipping that power dynamic to give parents more of the power with that. So that's just something that stuck with me. Thanks again, Eyal. Okay, and so now we're going to transition to our panel to hear from other practitioners and experts in their thoughts on how to create partnership, solidarity, and equity and bring that to action. And so on today's panel, we have Stacy Hinson, who is the coordinator for early learning from Washington County Public Schools, Kathleen Kearns, who's a Judy Center coordinator, Bobby McDonald, who is the doctoral resident from the Harvard School of Education and also part of Education Reimagine, and Eyal Bergman, who's also doctoral candidate from the same program, the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And so Dr. Hinson, welcome. So I would like for you to share with us, can you tell us about the Washington County Public Schools Early Learning Program?
Sure. So if you just advance the slideshow, there we go. So Washington County is sort of a medium-sized county in the state of Maryland as far as school systems go. We're located in the western part of the state. Hagerstown kind of sits at the middle of our county. That's the city that's known as the hub city. Historically, that was the gateway to the west for the railroad system. We have 48 schools that serve about, or a little bit over 23,000 students. Our county's large in dynamics in that there's urban areas, suburban areas, and rural demographics, which, as you're talking and I'm listening, we have so many different, areas within our county that really we have to approach our family engagement much differently in each area. So that's something that we're learning to do differently, and it's challenging us, but we cannot blanket statement anything that I say today because everything's different according to, honestly, the school and where it's situated within our county. We have growing poverty rates. That's one of our challenges right now. Only 21% of our citizens have a bachelor's degree or higher. Our EL population is expanded. Currently, we have over 40 different languages in our county, with the top 3 being English, Spanish, and French. So what you can see, though, is currently our enrollment is only 821. So we're kind of in that place where most of you probably on the call are, is we really need to begin enrolling students, and our families are nervous. We are currently face-to-face, which is really helpful for us to get the ball rolling for enrollment for next year. But again, we have families that are still a little bit hesitant to enroll. So we are staffed to meet the needs of 1,200 students, but only have 800. So, if you're thinking through a superintendent's lens, that's probably going to mean cutting positions. So we are on a endeavor to enroll as many kids as we can, doing a lot of things and reaching out to our families as much as we can. We have 25 elementary schools. So there's a pre-K in every elementary school. We also have a pre-K in one of our high schools, and it's a collaborative between their teacher academy and our pre-K, which has proven to be a really great and successful program. We participate in Excels, which is the quality measurement system in the state of Maryland. Currently, if our schools are not at a level 5, they're all in process of being there, because our goal is that all 25 of our elementary schools will be at a level 5, the highest quality programming. We actually have one advanced learner pre-K. We have a behavioral pre-K program. It's not really a classroom because our kids are in and out of it. We didn't want it to be one of those things where once you land here, that's a life sentence for you. So it's just there to meet the needs of children behaviorally. And once they have met their goals, we push them back out into gen ed with typical peers. So we currently have 4 integrated pre-K classrooms, which are a blend of special ed and gen ed students. We're probably going to add another one next year. Those integrated classrooms have more of the higher needs special ed students, and not just like speech language disorder or something like that. We have one pre-K 3 classroom, ton of partnerships, and incredible staff that I can't speak to enough. We just work so well together. It's really what's made this successful. It has very minimal to do with what I do and more to do with what the folks do down at the ground level. So I can't thank the staff, the teachers, paraprofessionals enough. They are just an incredible group of people. And we also have pretty high quality professional development around research-based foundational skills. So that being said, that kind of gives you an eyeball view of Washington County. And so what are we doing for family engagement? So if you want to shift to the next slide.
And so Dr. Hinson, as you talk about family engagement and the time that we have left, if you could really focus in on your, on the porch visits, that would be really helpful so that other folks can hear a particular strategy that you're implementing in your district.
Absolutely. So this slide shows 2 of our strategies. You can hear that we're doing a lot, our superintendent's doing a lot, and still only 44% of our students are coming to us prepared for kindergarten. So we knew we needed to do more. The pieces that we felt were missing were our families. We needed to engage our families more. I think if we've learned anything this year, it's the importance of our families and the education of their students. So on the left, you can see a picture through our Early Childhood Advisory Council. We used some grant funds to do an early McLearning night. And at that event, the children that came to that event would get a free Happy Meal, and they also received a free game. So parents could play games. Some stayed in the restaurant and played with their students. Some took them home. It was a great activity. We would love to expand that, but then COVID hit. So the other thing that we do within all of our elementary schools are porch visits. So I'm going to let Kathy play the video of this porch visit because it explains it way more than I can, and then I'll speak to it a little bit.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Huber. I'm a pre-K teacher at Emma K. Dowd, and I'm here today to do a porch visit for my new pre-K friend, James. Pre-K teachers will be reaching out to do porch visits for your student as a way to help start the relationship between the student, the family, and the teacher. When we come to these porch visits, we will be bringing all kinds of goodies. A learning bag filled with materials to make learning at home successful, as well as a 50-book library that the students can keep. Hi, James! How are you, buddy? I'm Mrs. Hoover. It's nice to meet you. Look at all this fun stuff that you get for learning for pre-K. Look at all those. The materials that we are bringing will be helpful in bridging the gap between home and school and to have your child have a successful pre-K year. We look forward to these porch visits and we can't wait to meet you. We hope that each day they will be ready with their bag and ready to learn with their teacher on the computer or on their iPad. Your learning bag is going to help you be ready for school today. Are you so excited? Can you get your counting bears out for Mrs. Hoover? Can you get your bears out of your bag? Where are they? Oh, I see them. How many fingers are on here, James? 1. Can you show me 2 fingers? Can you hold up 2 fingers? Good job, buddy! We encourage all families to enroll in our high-quality pre-K. We will ensure personalized instruction to meet the needs of all learners. Even though we can't physically be here together in the classroom, we have a spot waiting for you when it's safe to return. We hope to see you soon.
So hopefully we don't have to do any of the virtual that was in that video, but it gives you an idea of our porch visits. So through one of our, through the Striving Readers Grant, we were able to fund the 50 books purchase for every pre-K student that enrolls. Again, our superintendent found that so valuable. So when that grant ended, that's now part of our general funds that all of our students to build their libraries and to start those relationships. Good news was that this year we're going to expand that to kindergarten. So we're going to visit not only our pre-K families, but also our kindergarten families. They won't get the 50 book libraries, but we did order some early learning materials for our kindergarten families as well. The other next step that I have here is, honestly, we then survey our parents to talk about the experience they had in pre-K. What we'd like to do is add our parents as survey creators, and possibly how could we make these porch visits better. We often think that we know best and make the decisions, but we want to bring them on board and say, what could we do truly to help bring you in more as partners? So that's a little bit about us.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Hinson. And I think what you really helped the group to see is that, you know, although we have you as part of the panel because you're doing some great things, but you're also facing challenges, just like so many others that are on this call. And so thanks for sharing what's happening in Washington County and the porch visits.
Yes, and I wanted to end with this photo just because I think this really captures it all. So this is a little boy and his face when he first got his books last summer. His teacher sent me this photo right after she left his home to share with me, to show, you know, if we want to talk about building relationships right from the start with our family and children, look at his little face. And if you look in the background, this little guy lives in a camper. So beyond all of his barriers and everything, it just really put everything in perspective for us as a staff that, you know, it doesn't matter. It's all about our little kids, teaching them, helping them grow, regardless of their circumstances or our circumstances. This is big work that we need to do for the sake of our kids.
So true. Thank you again for sharing. And so next we have Kathleen Kearns, who's the coordinator of the Judy Center.
Hi, good afternoon. First of all, it's my pleasure to work with Stacy in her role as our early learning coordinator. And I know she doesn't give herself much credit, but a lot of success for the programming that is in our pre-K really comes down to some of her leadership too. So she's a great leader, and I just needed to make sure she's aware of that. I think one of the first things that I was to kind of address is to let people know what, in a nutshell, is the Judy Center. And the Judy Center, of course, is a partnership of many of the early learning agencies that are within our community. We offer a comprehensive support to our families who is providing access to our early childhood education and programs, to family support programs as well, and making sure that, just as Stacy talked about, the whole child, we are making sure that the whole child is ready for kindergarten by the time they get there. The goal of the Judy Center is that children enter school ready to learn. So with that being said, you realize that most of our work happens prior to our children coming into kindergarten. So we work hand in hand with pre-K. Head Start is one of our greatest partners, the Family Center programs, so many great programs that we have. The Judy Centers are based in Title I schools. So in Washington County, we are in 2 of our Title I schools. We're in Vester and Ruth Ann Monroe Primary. And one of the things that our Judy Center, and I really think statewide, the Judy Centers work on in these early years, is parent engagement, because research supports that parent engagement is one of the highest predictors of children's success in school. So it just makes sense for the parents to be engaged and ready when we hit the ground running in pre-K.
And Kathy,
I mean, in NK.
can you share with us how the added layer of home visits has supported that?
Sure. Absolutely. Home visits are one of our favorite things to do because home visits are really the foundation of developing your relationship with parents and with families. You are meeting parents where they are, and I think, as Kelly had said I saw in the chat, that you're going to do that in not a judgment-free zone. Absolutely, that's very important. Some of the simple things we do when we are engaging in home visits, we might be delivering materials for classroom teachers, for parents who can't get to the school in order to get those materials. We might be delivering materials for our own programs, maybe the virtual play groups that we've been doing. We've also delivered furniture, groceries, healthcare items. There's a multitude of things. But when you really get to some of the other, I guess, deeper things that we do for home visits, we go into service coordinate. So we might be helping families complete applications so they are getting enrolled for Head Start, maybe help with some of the more social service type programs that parents may need some help with some of those applications and making sure that they have all that paperwork together. And then we also do home-based programs. And it's a kind of a two-gen approach because the home-based programs that we use, we work with the parents as the child's first teacher, and then also in helping and sharing with the parent the development of the child and some of those activities, and really helping parents understand maybe what's appropriate and some of those skill sets that they need to be working on to be ready for school.
You shared with us about information about how you're developing parent leaders, and we think that it would be great for the participants on this call to learn more about. So can you share that with us?
Absolutely. What we've found, we've always known that parents and learning from peers is important and it's very effective. But during this time of COVID, we've learned a big lesson. We had parents that have been with us every week, more than one time a week, for parenting classes, for play groups, for it evolved into what are we going to do next because the parenting class is over. Can we do article studies? Can we do book studies? All kinds of things. Can we do workshops on cooking? So we've met with parents every week. What we have found though is, and what's made this most successful, is the parents within that group nurture each other. They bring other parents into the fold, and they demonstrate the parent leader skills. When a parent is struggling, another parent in that group will say, well, you see it that way. However, do you realize that you are spending time with your child doing this? You are, and they're building the parents up and really showing them what they are doing right, building on the strengths just as they should be. So what we would like to do, or what we are going to do, is we are going to do two different things. We're going to train our parents so that they can lead some of the programs or co-lead some of the programs, such as the Chicago Parent Program with us. And we are also going to give parents opportunities to lead or co-lead workshops where they're sharing their talent, their interest, their skill set with other parents as well. The second thing that we are going to do in our schools is to develop a parent leadership group. We need our parents' voice. We need our parents to help us plan what we are offering parents. And not only what we're offering parents, but how we are offering things to parents. Because a lot of times it's not what you offer, but how you do it. And we need their voice in helping us to better reach the parents and really what the parent needs. Judy Centers statewide start their school year off with um, parent, we call it an interest form, but it's a needs assessment. So, and then you work from that needs assessment for your programming for the year. But like I said, it's kind of how you do that programming. Sometimes it makes it much more successful. So we need our parents to guide us along the way, work with us.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for sharing with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
And so next up we have Bobby McDonald. Bobby. And so Bobby, she is, again, a graduate of the doctoral in education leadership, or soon to be graduate, from Harvard University. She'll be graduating in spring of 2021. Her capstone in residency focused on research and design for the creation of equitable, community-based, learner-centered ecosystems. And previously, she was the executive director of City Neighbors Foundation and developed, co-designed and developed 3 City Neighbors schools that answer the question, what would it take for every student to be known, loved, and inspired? And so the City Neighbors schools in Baltimore, Maryland, they're teacher and student led, and they serve students K through 12 with an emphasis on project learning, arts integration, and it's inspired by Reggio Emilia. And the work there in designing the charter schools, Bobby really worked with the team on opening all 3 schools and creating structures for belonging, rituals that build a shared vision and co-design for the implementation of City Neighbors. Her previous experience, she's taught pre-K and kindergarten, and she supervised student teachers. So thank you, Bobby, so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Shannon. It's nice to be here. That was a long intro.
No problem. I wanted to make sure I got all of it in. And so can you share with us the link between your experiences as an early educator to designing schools, and how that connects with your research now and led to this idea of reimagining schools?
Sure. Yeah. You know, as an early childhood teacher, like most of you, you know, we really, we know that you have to start with the child and know that child for who they are as a unique person. And I just included these pictures. The one on the left is actually at the University of Maryland Child Development Lab, the Center for Young Children, where I was teaching kindergarten and 2s and 3s and 4s. And there, you know, it's a constructivist program that really asked you to think about how children are learning. It was really focused on children's learning, you know, the zone of proximal development. Like, what can we do? What environment can we create that would allow children to move to that next place? And I know that the people on this call are very well versed in that and know how to do that well. When I had the chance to design schools, and the picture on the other side, the right, are the faculty from City Neighbors. We had like 100 folks there, but when we designed the schools K to 12, I thought, and the team thought, what if we took those early childhood concepts about knowing each child really well and allowing for some emergence of what is being learned, and developmentally allowing kids to learn at the pace that is right for them, and pushed it all the way up through 12th grade. What does play look like for a 5th grader? What does play look like in high school? Rather than what often happens for us early childhood, is that things get pushed down, so that we might have kids doing things that, you know, they're not ready to do. And that's, you know, us being worried that they're not going to be prepared. So anyway, at City Neighbors, we had a chance to explore that, and it really was an experience of bringing together a community and saying, we're going to raise our children together over many years, teachers and families and community members. How can we do this in the most loving, joyful, and quality way? And I think the part of that led me to the research, or the work that I've been doing now, is the idea that that community and every school and every classroom was in a conversation, you know, a conversation that was driven by questions that we wanted to answer. And in the case of City Neighbors, the first question was, if you could have the best school you could imagine, what would it be? And we spent time answering that question and opening the first school. And then we got more specific when we grew and opened the second and third to what would it take for every student to be known, loved, and inspired. And those questions are great. I think what I wanted to share with all of you is the idea that you are answering questions with your families and in your classrooms. And the way we pose those questions and the way we narrate those stories really matters. And right now we have this opportunity to reach even deeper and more closely to our families than we have before. You could go to the next slide. So I just kind of connect that up with the next thing. So now I am actually just became a partner for ecosystem advancement at Education Reimagined. We changed my title. It just happened. And so Education Reimagined is a nonprofit that was started by a diverse group of people that's dedicated to this vision of education that creates a North Star. Similar to what Eyal was talking about, it's not something that can be mandated, but it's a vision that puts you on a path towards a future that you want to create. And for Education Reimagined, it really begins with learner agency, seeing the learner at the center, which I think, more early childhood does that better than any other part of the spectrum usually. And partly because that's the only way you can really help kids grow and learn, but also because we've become experts at it. We've really looked closely at developmentally how children learn and grow. And so we're really positioned to embrace this kind of vision better than others, I think. But so learner agency at the center, and by that they really mean self-determination. And it really aligns with that liberatory, freedom-seeking way of being alive. We want our schools not to teach kids how to obey or how to comply or how to simply follow rules. That's not going to help us solve the complex difficulties we face in our world and our nation. But we want our schools, and I'm editorializing, I realize that, but this vision is based on an ideal that we want to grow people who have practiced thinking for themselves and are very clear that they're in the driver's seat of their own learning and their own life. And that's really what's meant by putting learner agency at the center. And at City Neighbors, we practice that a little bit in terms of, rather than, we thought about what level of independence kids could have starting in the earliest grades and how does it increase over the years of schooling until high school, where kids could be working out in the hallways independently. And that they could be, trusted and expect that kind of independence. So learner agency at the heart is a really interesting one to reflect on when you look at your own classrooms and your own practice. How is that independence being built? Socially embedded is the idea that, we don't learn by ourselves. Even Eyal's tiny little 10-month baby, if that baby didn't have the interactions with mom and dad, they're, I just blanked out on your baby's name. Lena's brain wouldn't develop naturally. We learn socially. Our true challenge is to maintain and develop as an individual within the collective, and both care about ourselves and our own interests and desires and the collective. And obviously, like as a society, we're experiencing and learning the power of the need to care about the collective and each of us as individuals. And then personalized, relevant, contextualized. And this part, I think, is the most exciting one that can really translate to the way you're thinking about welcoming families back in. One thing that happened virtually that I heard from many families was there was something about seeing people in their homes, in their living rooms, that made families even more present and real in our relationships. And I wonder what it would look like to really invite that into the school, so that we're saying who you are and your ancestry and your wisdom that you have in your community. And there's a lot of communities and different cultural ways of embracing community or friendships or education. How do we bring those into our classrooms in an authentic way and really invite them in because of what they can give to us, not just as a way to engage the kids, but because we need them.
And Bobby, can
Yeah.
you, for the sake of time, can you transition to talk about how we can take this idea and bring it into systems? How do we systemize this?
Yeah. You can go to the next slide and I'll just real quickly. So one of the things I've been, you can, again, one thing I've been studying is the idea of dynamic living systems. And so I think one way that you can think about this is anytime that you are thinking about the work you're doing in your classroom or at the school level or as a network level, think about anytime you're thinking of kids as averages, how can you think of them as unique people? So any chance you have to think about, rather than thinking of things as a fixed, this is the way we've always done it, putting it to the other side and thinking, how could we make this dynamic? How could we actually bring folks together and say, what question do we want to answer? Rather than saying, come answer this question. So it's really about building a dynamic, living, whole system. And I think as early childhood educators, we're actually really good at that because we know that patterns develop over time. And in living systems, that is what happens. Patterns develop over time because you can see the whole. I'm going to be brief because I know we're running out of time. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so you might recognize these pictures from some kids from Reggio Emilia, starting with each child in their home, and then you could click on it again, seeing their community and what they're a part of, and you can click on it again, and then seeing that whole village of how we're connected. The Education Reimagined vision is of a whole ecosystem and saying that learning doesn't just happen in the classroom. It does happen on front porches. It happens outside the building. It happens in playgrounds. It happens in parks. How do we really connect with that? How do we make that part of our work altogether? And those are the kinds of questions that are part of thinking in a living systems kind of way. But I will stop there, Shannon, unless you want to prompt me for something else.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, Bobby, and thank you for sharing ways that we can actually reimagine and implement a reimagined education for our kids. And so finally, I would like for Eyal to join us again, and just if you could give us your input, Eyal, and given the ideas you've heard from other panelists, how could we operationalize liberation, solidarity, and equity in this coming year and beyond?
Thanks. I think from what I've heard, there's a lot of work already happening. I mean, folks are doing this work. And I think what I'll do is just kind of connect a few dots that I thought were really insightful to me as I was listening. First, on the work in Washington County, the porch visits is a really important a show of institutional priority. And to the extent that others can follow that lead, if you've ever been a teacher, like you're pulled in a million different directions. And so in order to have the time, we display our priorities by how we ask people to spend their time. And so that is a really useful sort of like institutional benchmark that I think is really important. And then also the power of parents connecting to each other. I heard that. I think that that's really important too. There's a lot of research that shows that when families are connected to each other, they're much more likely to be connected to the school or to the center. And I think and they come to rely on each other, and they start to see that, oh, I am doing a lot of work already to help my kids. And then I was really also inspired by hearing Bobby speaking, especially what she said at the very end, like learning really does happen everywhere. And kids, I mean, I see it in my baby. I think anybody who has kids of their own sees that children, actually parents are not just their kids' first educator. They are actually the most important educator in kids' lives. And so the question for us as formal educators, as schooling professionals, which is different than learning professionals, I think, although there's a lot of overlap, is how do we capture the parents' deep expertise in their children? How do we see them for the geniuses that they are and the work that they're already doing? And how do we as educators, as good Bobby was talking about, how do we ask questions together? And so to the extent that we can use these institutional, the time that we've allocated to see ourselves as educators, as learners of parents, so like asking them to tell us about their hopes and dreams for their kids, to tell us about what really makes their kids tick, like what is it that your kid loves to learn about already, and then show them weeks and months later how you've taken what they've told you and built it into your pedagogy, into your teaching, into your everyday practices, builds that solidarity. And I think that that's how we start to move. And I mean, I'm already hearing it here. So that's and I think that that's a way to flip the power dynamics, because it basically says we're educators. Yeah, we have a deep set of expertise around what works for teaching and learning, but you're deep expert in your kid and what your kid's learning is too. So how do we marry those two together instead of us delivering to you? How do we share with each other? And that's what starts to flip the power dynamics. But there's no way to do that without really focusing on building trust first. So I hate to end without saying that to conclude. So
yes, thank you for your thoughts. And thank you to all of the panelists for your expertise, your on the ground practices. I hope that everyone was able to take away some ideas that you can implement this summer and going into the fall. Thank you. Sue?
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Eyal. Thank you, panelists, for your stories and your expertise. We really appreciate that. I'm Sue Fothergill, Director of Strategic Programming for Attendance Works. Kathy, do you mind bringing the deck back up? I wanted to bring together this conversation around family engagement and relationship building to attendance and how we see those as connecting on behalf of Attendance Works. So in particular, attendance is a leading indicator for a whole range of different intangibles potentially of what's happening in a young person's life. So when young children are attending regularly in early ed programs, we know then that there's not necessarily barriers to accessing to learning. When children are able to show up regularly, participate often, it suggests that there aren't barriers in the way. It tells us that the students and the families are engaged in the programming, that there are relationships between students and families and the school community, that families and children, their health, physical, emotional health and safety and wellness, when children are able to attend and participate regularly, that children are progressing academically, and that the children are engaged in learning when they attend regularly. But what we know, next slide, is that relationships are critical to ensuring attendance and participation in learning. And in particular, from an equity perspective, paying special and close attention to the relationships that we have with our students and families who have experienced disruptions in their lives due to COVID-19, who are experiencing potentially economic instability, families and children who live in poverty, families and children who experience racial discrimination, and families and children who experienced disability bias or other types of biases. So utilizing our relationships and being equity focused and equity centered requires us to acknowledge that there are underlying challenges that can contribute to fracturing of relationships, and asks us to examine when we see attendance not happening or children not regularly participating, what are the barriers or what are the challenges that are getting in the way of that child's regular participation? And how can we use relationships to overcome the barriers and to support students and families in being able to be connected and engaged with us. Some of the things that we need to know as educators and early learning program providers, we have to ask ourselves, does every student and family have at least one meaningful connection? Hopefully more, many more, like peer-to-peer connections and adult to school staff to family connections, but at least one meaningful connection. How do we know that, how do we ensure that we're able to reach every student and family, and really looking for multiple redundancies? So do we have multiple backup phone numbers? Do we have more than one contact for each student that's in our program, so that if required, we're able to reach students and families in a moment's notice? And lastly, when we see absences adding up, do we have protocols and practices in place to ensure that we are reaching out to families as soon as we notice that there may be a problem? Next slide. So the one thing about that I just want to close out with before we turn to our next amazing couple of educators that we want to bring on to chat with you, is just that this past year we've seen tremendous enrollment decline, and we've also seen much lower levels of participation and attendance in the early grades. We do think it's going to be necessary to message in a very strong way to students and families in particular, the importance of early grades participation, the importance of early education and programming, and the value of participating and showing up, and that the programming is essential and the participation helps us to really meaningfully benefit from early education opportunities. And I just thought that the video earlier that CECEI shared, where the teacher talked about attendance and enrollment and bringing families in, I thought was a great example of the kind of messaging I think our organization thinks will be essential in the coming year. So I really am excited to turn to our friends at the Baltimore City Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success and the Baltimore City Head Start, Shannon Burrows Campbell and Christina Schwan, to talk about your family engagement practices at Head Start to help to lend additional voices about what are the specific ways that we can pivot in this moment and support our students and families. Shannon and Christina, do you want to unmute yourselves and show your videos and join us on screen? And
so would love to, Sue, but I can't because the host stopped the videos. So if the host could restart our videos, we could probably show our screen.
Let me do that. I will do that for you, Shannon. I think you can do it now. And Christina.
Yep.
I'm going to do that for you. Sorry, we were trying to manage a lot, so I'm glad you were both here. And I just want to point out that Christina has been with Head Start for 20 years. So congratulations, Christina, for just an incredibly, incredible, lengthy commitment to early education and to children and families. First, can you just talk a little bit about the Baltimore City Head Start agency and how you've had to pivot with family engagement over the past year?
Sure. So thanks for having us. I feel like we're here and we're learning so much, and so I'm just soaking it all in. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about Baltimore City Head Start, but I feel like I'm in a room of all other experts. So this is an exciting time. So Baltimore City Head Start is one of 5 Head Start and Early Head Start grantees in the city of Baltimore that work together in collaboration and in a very formal way of providing early Head Start and Head Start services to all the children and families in the Baltimore City area. So we serve, early Head Start serves pregnant women up to 3, and then Head Start targets primarily 3-year-olds, but we do serve some 4s based on parent choice. And so we collectively, we have about 50 locations and a little less than 200 classrooms throughout the city. And we have the pleasure of employing some really amazing teachers and assistant teachers and disabilities coordinators and mentor coaches, as well as we have an entire staff dedicated to family and community engagement. It is their entire job. It is what they love to do. It's what their passion is. And they really help, as we talked to them this morning, they keep the program running, and they make sure that the parent voice is interwoven in all that we do. We serve collectively close to 2,800 children and families, and we had full enrollment was not an issue prior to the pandemic. But like Sue had shared, enrollment is down. Families are not wanting to come back to be in person. And so that's been a significant challenge this school year in particular. And so with enrollment being down, we're having more when we offer our virtual services, and some of us offer some in-person here and there. Still attendance is a struggle. And we are also trying to strategize and plan for that for the fall. We are operating, like I said, a hybrid model where we have some in-person classrooms and we have a lot of virtual classrooms. But it's built, that model is built totally on what the parents want and what they're driving. And so I have done more surveys in my entire career this year than I have the entire career to families to find out what their interest is. What do they want? We know what the community always wants, but what do the families that we want to serve, what do they want? Do they want the classrooms opened? Do they want to be virtual? And so the whole model is driven by their interest. And then as we're moving forward to the summer, our goal is to open a lot more in person. Families are getting more comfortable. It's small, but they're getting more comfortable. And so we're going to open more in-person classrooms with the goal that by the fall, we'll have all of our teachers back in our centers, and we'll still offer in-person and virtual. So Christina can talk a little bit about how we had to pivot, because it was like redoing a whole system as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, so when the pandemic hit, we were used to going recruitment, going outside, and of course we couldn't do it. So we ended up using what it calls a parent portal. That is basically the parents apply online. So of course was a challenge to be able to reach out to families. So we reached to agencies, we trained different staff members how to access the portal, and we start putting the link, because it's actually a link, everywhere we could, agencies, families, websites. So, but then the challenge was, how do we keep engaged with the families? How do we engage them when we are used to having it in person? So we actually, through the system, we contact families in 24 hours when they applied, and have a conversation, of course, through the phone or Zoom, using the technology. So we learn how to do it, with all the technology, using text, email, phone, Zoom. We use everything. So then through the year, we start going more into the community. So now the plan is a mix. Actually, we go more into the community, but also, we learn about to use the technology. So that will help us, I hope, in the future. The other thing we did is we have a lot as an attendance. Actually, we never changed following up after the children don't show up. If the child doesn't show up one day into school, the family service coordinator call them the same day or the next day and find out what's going on. We have the data, it goes into our database, and try to solve the problem, try to give support to the family for the reasons. It was very challenging because at the beginning, the main reason was probably not having tablets or to access. We were able to deliver tablets to the families and train them how to use it, because that's what we learned, that some of them didn't know how to use it. And then it was more different grandparents, different reasons why parents working. There were some family members, so they couldn't attend. But it was our attendance, I gotta say, was much better this year than it was at the end of the pandemic. We were
Christina, I
yeah.
want to say thank you. And I just looked at the clock and we have
Oh,
2 minutes left. No, it's not. We ran long and I apologize because I know you both have really important ideas to share. What I would like to do is definitely invite you back to share more in the future. And I apologize that we ran long and cut your time short. So that is absolutely our doing. I do have to close this out though, because it's nearly 4 o'clock. I'm going to ask folks to type into the chat one key takeaway that you have from this webinar, from what you heard from all the amazing early educators that we have heard from. Kathy, can you go to the next slide? So as folks share in the chat your key takeaway, I just want to highlight a few resources. Next slide. Attendance Works has free webinars coming up through our attendance awareness campaign. You'll receive this deck and you can use the link to sign up. Next slide. We also have a new toolkit that we have released to support engagement through this spring, summer, and fall with specific activities and strategies for early educators. Very much aligned to the ideas that you've heard today. Next slide. There is a family and community, next slide, family and community engagement conference coming up hosted by IEL. I'm sure many of you are familiar with IEL, so it's an excellent opportunity to dig into family and community engagement. Next slide, I want to thank our Attendance Works staff, Shannon Coleman-Siciliano, Jane Sundius, and Kathy Wolfenden for supporting this webinar. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us. Go to the next slide, Kathy. And as we pull up, I please encourage you to take our post-webinar survey. Let us know how we can get better. Let us know what kind of topics you want to discuss on the last webinar that'll be hosted this fall. And certainly we want to learn more about your practices so that the data that you share with us can be part of this study that we are doing in partnership with the Maryland State Department of Education and the University of Maryland. So we appreciate your time. We appreciate your attention. We appreciate your effort and work that you've been doing this past year, and certainly encourage you to participate in the study and be part of what we do next in this work together. Shannon, any last goodbyes or words?
No, just thanks everyone for joining, and really want to thank all the panelists who spent time prepping and joining us today.
And Baltimore City Head Start, we're going to get you back in. So I just, block off October. We'll be back in touch. And I am sorry that we cut it short. We really do want to hear from you. So thanks everyone for your time. Really appreciate you. I see some of the key takeaways: connect with parents, develop parent leaders. I love that. Let's see what else we have here. I used to think everyone is too busy. Now I think where we ask people to invest their time proves what we value most. That is really fabulous. And Bobby, someone loved your question. What would it take for every student to be known, loved, and inspired? Which is a beautiful question and really a great way to close this session out. How are we all supporting each other and being known, loved, and inspired, our children and our families and our staff? So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, for helping us to manage this. Appreciate everybody.